Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Christensen and this is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, a gathering place for fellow fiends the world over to discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you want to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe go back and check out some of our previous episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to discuss in the future. That kind of connection is exactly what we're looking for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. Low-budget horror filmmakers, take note. You can make an original and frightening film for barely any money. It simply requires a fresh approach and more imagination than Karo syrup. Witness 1999's groundbreaking sensation from co-creators Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez, The Blair Witch Project. The slender premise sees three college students go into the woods near Burkittsville, Maryland in October 1994 to record footage for their documentary about the mythical Blair Witch. They are never heard from again. 1 year later, their footage is discovered and later assembled by authorities in an attempt to learn their fate and potential whereabouts. What we are presented is that footage. Over the past quarter century, the Blair Witch Project has earned as many detractors as fans. Many have taken issue with the hype surrounding its release, the motion sickness-inducing cinematography, or the, quote, annoying characters. Some have complained that it ripped off earlier films like Cannibal Holocaust, or that it was a better example of innovative marketing than skillful filmmaking. But to dismiss Blair Witch as just not scary is to ignore its creators' evocative use of sound, the authentic and mostly improvised performances, the flawlessly realized found footage motif, how many on-screen events go unanswered, the palpable tension between the increasingly desperate characters, and the bone-chilling, mind-bending climax. It does, however, require a willingness to go along for the ride, to enjoy a simple campfire tale well told. The fact that it went on to earn $250 million speaks to its effectiveness, and there is no denying that this little film helped change the face of cinema forever. The Blair Witch Project's lore is so strong, we believe such a legend truly existed. Funny thing is, now it does. Summertime is here, and it's time to head into the woods. I've got an awesome panel to chat about this amazing, groundbreaking film with me, so let's bring everybody in. And let's say hello to Mark Easted.
Hey, everybody.
Robin Graves.
Hey, everybody. Horror Game Ned Flanders. How's it going?
Kevin Matthews.
Hi, everybody.
Eric Fritchus.
Ooh, very scary.
And Katie Glidewell, the blonde and sometimes bald in front.
Hey, everybody. Looking forward to discuss the Blair Witch.
And we are here to chat about the Blair Witch Project from 1999, celebrating its 25th anniversary. And we'll also be chatting about the sequels, Blair Witch 2 from 2000 and Blair Witch from 2016. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and a welcome.
Hey, thanks for the invite. I'm super stoked to talk about it. I did not realize that the Blair Witch Project could rent a car this year, so that's kind of cool.
That's right. That's right. Let's go ahead and get started with, it's the summer of 1999, and where were you when you started hearing about the Blair Witch, and what was your reaction to it? Kevin, I'm going to jump over to Scotland and let you kick us off. Actually, you're not in Scotland anymore. I apologize. You're a Scotsman living in England.
Yeah, that's fine. I was also a Scotsman living in England when the Blair Witch Project was released. I was living in a very different part of England that was a tiny, tiny village with a cinema about 15 miles away. So unfortunately, I'd heard a lot of the hype about the Blair Witch Project, so I knew it wasn't real. I knew it had taken audiences, taken America by storm, and I was keen to get along to see it. So it was a long drive to the cinema, but I went out of my way to make sure I saw this horror movie. I stood up at the end and was hugely disappointed because I'm an atheist. I don't believe in ghosts, vampires, werewolves, or the supernatural. I'm a very brave man. Until we get in the car and there are no road lights for a good stretch of the journey back. And then I start to think about every little creak and sound in the Blair Witch Project and realized it was a masterpiece that had invaded my mind and would stay there for eternity. So I ended up being very impressed, but it took a while to process on the way home.
That's good. That's good. Well, let's come back stateside. Robin, how about you?
Well, I was 7 or 8 years old when this came out.
All right, youngster, sit down. Sit down. We'll talk to you in a second.
Yeah, my whole family all really likes horror stuff, so it was talked about a lot around me. And I think my first actual exposure to it was like the Scooby-Doo parody they did on Cartoon Network for like a summer thing. And I remember my mom being like, it was dumb, nothing happened. And then I watched it and was horrified. So I didn't know where she got the dumb from. I guess there wasn't enough like boobs and blood or something, but tremendously freaked me out growing up in the middle of the woods. So it made some really long sleepless nights there. First time I saw it, I was probably like 10 or 11. It took me a couple of years to get around to it.
Mark, how about you?
Yeah, I was a little bit older than 7, and I was like 29. So I knew it wasn't real when I went to see it, but I was super excited to see it because, at that point it was something pretty, if not new, unique for the time, like hadn't been done in a long time. And it was a great theater experience. It was packed. And those last 2 or 3 minutes seared into my brain. After it was over, I just kind of sat there like hypnotized for a while before I got up and left. And those like images from that stayed in my brain, still do. So yeah, it was a great theater experience.
Eric, how about you?
I was in my first real world job as a DJ in Tupelo, Mississippi. And I'd been reading like film festival buzz about the Blair Witch Project for months and had haunted the website, read everything I could possibly read on it. And it was one of the first movies as an adult that I was like, I must be there. And when it got its national release, the local cinema did not pick it up. So being a DJ, I talked shit about the local cinema on the air. And I did that for a couple of weeks until finally one Friday, it still wasn't there. It wasn't on their movie phone when I called. And until I talked some more shit, and somebody from the theater like called me. It was like, dude, it's here. So I went to see it and was blown away by it, except I, embarrassingly enough, didn't understand the ending.
Uh-huh.
I didn't recall the bit at the beginning where they set that up. And so the following Monday, I was like on the air going, I liked it, but I didn't understand the ending. I don't think this was as good a movie. And so embarrassingly, again, a listener had to call and explain and hold my hand and walk me through it. And then I was like, oh. So I gave no spoilers. I just assured all the listener that they could go and find a fantastic film.
Awesome. Katie, how about you?
So I was in Chicago, and like Eric, I had heard a lot of stuff about the Blair Witch Project through different film festivals. In fact, I remember hearing that when it played, I think it was Sundance, that after the film was done, it just got all these boos because they felt like it was exploiting these poor kids who had died. And it's like, how could you do this and all that stuff? And then all 3 actors came out on stage and they're like, hey, we're alive. It's a movie. And I was like, holy shit, I need to watch this. And I watched it at the theater, the movie theater, when there was a movie theater by Second City. That is now gone, which is a shame.
Oh, Piper's Alley.
Where I don't think they show movies there anymore. I think they do other things. But it was packed. Packed theater, like not a seat open. One of the things I did, though, I hated the fact that it was shaky. Like I thought I was going to get sick. And I feel like a lot of people did that. But it's very interesting rewatching it on my TV that when they talk about, this is about 3 kids making a documentary, they actually have it be a little shaky. Like it's like getting the audience ready for that. And I did remember the thing in the corner, and I remember telling other people around me, it's like, remember that one guy, which I thought was brilliant, that they just had one guy doing this. I thought the acting was so real. It's like, I had no idea that this wasn't, it looked like it was real. And her screams, everything. And just rewatching it again, I think there's so many things that they did brilliantly regarding this film, and it totally stands up after 25 years.
Well, and I think that is kind of the beauty of this film, is the simplicity with which the story is laid out. I mean, all you need to know is what's on that title card. In October 1994, 3 filmmakers went into the woods. They never came back. A year later, their footage is found. Here it is. And you get to watch that play out in front of you. And as we watch Mike, Josh, and Heather slowly kind of like falling apart as a unit, but we also watch them, kind of like we see the early part of their documentary efforts. And I think there's something kind of genius about that, because it's found footage, but it's also set up as though filmmakers have actually taken that footage and assembled it into a film. So like all of that is given circumstances, as opposed to a lot of the found footage films that followed, where it's just like, no, it's just, here's this stuff, here's this footage. We don't know who put it together. I love the lore of the Blair Witch Project and how kind of like it works. Like it works as an airtight concept. And then, as some of you mentioned, there was all the lore that extended beyond that. There was the website. There was the companion piece, The Curse of the Blair Witch, which showed on, what was that? Was that on the Sci-Fi Network?
Yeah,
Sci-Fi.
And I think most of you have seen those companion pieces as well. But it's like, that's just kind of what makes this film great. I never thought it was real, but that's also what I love about it. I love how it works as a piece of fiction and yet doesn't take time to wink at the camera. Let's talk a little bit about what's as interesting as what happens on screen is what was happening off screen. If anybody wants to talk a little bit or just kick off the conversation about how this film came to be. Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez as our directors.
I don't got much about how it came to be, but a little behind the scenes thing I picked up, like getting re-familiar with all this, is just how lost the actors had to be during making this thing. I think that's so cool, and it plays to the like believability of it. Where I think the story is they would all get given like a little coordinate sheet.
Mm-hmm.
They had to go out into the woods and find like a cache with their motives and stuff for the day. So everybody's kind of in the dark about what's going to happen and who the other people or what they're going for. And that comes across so well. And I don't know, I think it takes what could have been another like, oh, they're running around with a camera, put the camera down and get out of there. And it moves it into this whole other thing that allowed so many people to think it was legit for so long.
Yeah.
I don't recall everything about the gestation or getting it done, but I do remember reading the stories and thinking of the insanity and the leap of faith required. Like if Katie and I turned up for some audition and the writer-director says, right, we're going to take you into the middle of the woods and at night we'll set up some scares and we want to see you reacting realistically to that. I would immediately just think, yeah, we're going to die. and they will find us years later. This is a snuff movie. I hope the check clears before I can get away. So that was, it was a real like collaborative effort that, we're hearing a lot of the conversation now from the actors about certain ways they would have liked things to go along afterwards, about their likenesses and their names. I think that's important, but I don't necessarily think anybody blames Myrick and Sanchez, who came together with the actors and made something phenomenal and, as Mark was saying, for the time at least, very unique. So it was really everyone putting the work in and having the trust in one another, an incredible level of trust. It's just it's almost unfathomable.
Well, what's interesting is that this has no earmarking of being a blockbuster, right? This is an experimental film. This is meant to be an independent feat. This isn't meant to play, on a grand scale. And so I think, yeah, of course, had we known it was going to be as big a hit as it was, things might have been done differently. But as it was, I mean, it was very much kind of setting it up as experimental circumstances, like teaching the actors how to use the equipment, because they're more or less filming a lot of what they're doing. Like they're actually, the filmmakers are the actors are filming themselves. Mark, did you have some behind the scenes stuff? I know you're always good for that.
Yeah, well, one thing I heard is that they whittled this 81 minutes down from 20 hours of footage.
Yeah.
So part of me thinks, like, what didn't we get to see? I'm sure that part of it is hours of garbage. Like, you literally can't see or hear, or it makes no sense, or it's terrible performance parts that they edited out. But I'm wondering, like, what else might have been in there.
Lots of
Um,
tree line, I think.
yeah. So I thought that was, yeah, and I agree, and I really do think, like you said, Aaron, that it wasn't. No one thought it was going to be. They had this tiny budget. It's half the reason it is what it is. It's like we don't have a budget to have a witch.
Right.
We don't have a budget to do any kind of special effects. We're just going to make things out of rocks and trees, and we have this old beat up house. That's the extent of our scares. So they kind of just were like, hey, let's try this. And I honestly, it is the marketing that made it.
Yeah.
Because it is somewhat the same setup as Cannibal Holocaust. Of this is footage of these people. The difference being this is not an exploitation movie that's controversial by content. And, but it was the marketing, I think, around it that helped it to become, at the time, it was the most profitable independent movie ever made, and still is up there. But it was just like whoever the marketing, I read his name. I think the guy who was more responsible for it. Brilliant and perfect timing. There was only a few years in there where that would have worked, where the internet was where it was. Like, it couldn't work today. You could, in 5 minutes of Googling, find out all the answers.
But and that is so wild that, like, it was this perfect time and place, and whoever that marketing person is, knowing to use the internet, which at the time is this brand new thing, knowing like, oh, we can totally catapult this thing through the tubes. And that's like just such one of those crazy artistic foresights that, like, you don't hear about a lot. It's like the guy sticking a screwdriver in his guitar speaker to make it break up. Like, and it changes the face of a medium of art for forever.
Well, and I want to address the Cannibal Holocaust, because a lot of people talk about Blair Witch as kind of being the genesis of the found footage movement. And yes, there is that aspect of Cannibal Holocaust where we have the quote real footage inside of a fictitious film. And I think that's, the verisimilitude of that is what makes Cannibal Holocaust work so well. But I don't know that we'd had a movie that, other than like Mondo movies, that it was just the documentary footage that we were seeing, just the captured footage. And I think that was also what helped kind of set Blair Witch apart.
I haven't seen it. Wasn't there also people talk about the last broadcast or something?
Yes, and I do want to talk about
before. I've never seen it, but I've heard people say, no, that was before it.
And last broadcast is kind of mid.
Well, I want to talk about Last Broadcast, because I watched it again in prep for this as well, because I'd seen Blair Witch Project 10 times. I'd only seen Last Broadcast once. I'm like, I need to bring this back into my head. So I think there's some interesting things to say. Last Broadcast, however, is set up very much as a documentary, as opposed to, again, just the documentary footage. Eric, I know you have the Blair Witch dossier that Daniel Stern put together, which, again, kind of extends the lore.
That was the thing that I was almost disappointed about with the movie, is that more of the lore wasn't included in it. And that's why I think the fake docu series, or The Curse of the Blair Witch, is essential viewing.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you watched it first, that would probably help, because it just gets your saliva going for the meal you're about to have. That was one of my disappointments in that. But the website, particularly the little sound effect that would happen at the very beginning when they brought up the tagline for the movie, that in a darkened, semi-abandoned house that I lived in at the time, was enough to send shivers up your spine. And with the Blair Witch dossier, I grabbed that up in a Walmart book section and just reread it, because I could not have enough information about this story. And there's a lot in there, that a lot of implications for explanations for what you even see in the movie that are not essential to enjoying the movie at all, but certainly add something to it, and I argue add something to the following two movies when you get into the possibility of time travel or time manipulation. that
Yeah.
the witch seems to be able to do.
Yeah, I agree that like the dossier, it's basically set up as somebody's investigating. They hire a private investigator. One of the families, I think it's Heather Donahue's family, hires a private investigator, and they go digging into and they interview all these people. So you have these transcripts from interviews that of people who never show up in the movie. That you never hear about. And then there's like they go off into the woods and they're going to recreate it, and it's like the lore just extends and extends. And I love it's kind of like, the Marvel universe in that regard, in that they really think it through. Everything plays fair with every other element that's in the movie. And it does enrich everything that happens in those 87 minutes of the Blair Witch Project. Like when you're watching, you're like, right, Rustin Parr, and there's a whole thing behind Rustin Parr and Ellie Kedward, et cetera, et cetera. Katie, how about you? What are some like fun facts you found out?
One of the scenes when everyone's in the tent and they're sleeping, that when the tent starts shaking, apparently the actors had no idea that was going to happen. That was the director doing it, and that just scared the shit out of them. One of the things, though, that I love so much about the movie is that they don't necessarily, of the three characters, they don't have someone be the bad guy and the intermediary and the good guy. They switch it up so well.
Yeah.
I do think that the Michael character definitely is the most unstable of the characters, but I think that's very, especially at that time, it's very important that they didn't have like someone be the bad guy and like put everything on the female character and all that stuff. They definitely like switched it around, because it's like you could say that Josh was like, well, he had more of a level head and all that stuff, but at the same time he was very manipulative towards Heather and like almost like evil, blaming her. It's like, oh, see, this is you on film, this is you. And it's like, then they would switch that up. And I think that's very important to show audiences that it's like, they're all on this together, they're all stressed out. And I don't know, I was really rewatching that. I was like, you know what, this is something I didn't like think about when I was recalling it and rewatching it now. And I'm like, that's very important that they did that, showing audiences like later on. I did find it very disturbing that I guess Heather Donahue's mom was receiving condolence cards because people actually thought that her daughter had died. None of those actors got even close to doing that. And it's an independent project. We've talked about, it's like you don't know that it's going to do this, but at the same time, there was no like re-upping their contract or anything like that. And then to go through that where family members are receiving condolence cards.
Yes, it was an independent film and these were non-union actors. And so there wasn't anything in place for their contracts for them to receive participation, residuals, et cetera. I think it's also worth just, these are actors who are improvising the entire script.
Yeah.
They have basic concepts, as I think it was Kevin mentioned, like they would be given key talking points, and this is what you're experiencing. And, somebody else, another actor would get a different set of notes and, say, I want you to push Heather on this, but they're basically making up the entire dialogue. And so the fact that there is that kind of shift in dynamic and alliances and things like that, that's just kind of like that magic alchemy that happened out in the woods. After like Josh disappears, Heather and Mike got less and less food. Like they didn't like to kind of like add into the reality. Like they were getting like a power bar for the entire day. So like the fatigue and the hunger would just add to, and again, it's something they signed on for.
Yeah.
Knowing like, okay, this is going to be this experiment and we're going to see what we get out of it.
Yeah. Do you think the interview process at the audition was like, so you like camping, like really camping?
Yes. I think, well, the interviews were basically, it wasn't a traditional audition. Like the actors would walk in and Ed Sanchez and Daniel Myrick would basically just kind of like bombard them with questions and try and throw them off and see how they would react just as humans, because that was what was going to be necessary. Like your humanity is what we're going to be recording.
Yeah. And Katie, your point about how there's no like, you're the good guy, you're the bad guy, you're the hysterical one. Like it helps the whole movie play like people in distress.
Yeah.
And it's just another, they really knew how to like not act, I guess, if that makes any sense. Like they're just sort of being out there, and it doesn't feel like people playing characters. And I think that's just part of the spell that the movie puts out on you.
Even the beginning when they're doing the interviews, I mean, the fact that the baby like goes over the woman's mouth, that to me is something I always remembered watching this film, because it's not like they can tell that toddler, so when your mom's talking about this, I want you to very, like put it over her mouth. It's like, oh yeah, no, we're just telling a story. It's not true.
that baby takes great direction.
She does. I mean, kudos to her. I don't know why she wasn't nominated for something. Like that was like that baby did very well. But even those opening interviews, I mean, I feel like the one that got cut short and that I wish would have talked a little bit more, because they bring her up. It's like, didn't Mary Brown talk about the stones? I'm like, well, actually she didn't, but I wish you would have shown that. But I feel like Mary Brown was maybe the only people they had on screen that seemed like she was acting, so they kind of wanted to cut that short or something. But yeah, every one of those, I was like, damn, these are really good. You can tell these people are just saying stuff. And yeah, for some reason, I always remember that guy talking about the kid in the corner. So then at the end, when it happened, I'm like, oh, that was good.
Well, a fun fact about our Mary Brown, that's actually Patty, the intern, who was the intern to the production designer, Ben Rock. And he was the one who ended up writing basically all the lore for it. And so she was such kind of like a curious character, like, well, we got to have Patty, the intern, play Mary Brown. Something you were just talking about, that dynamic of people falling apart in the woods. That was something that a lot of people took issue with. It's like, they're so annoying, like Heather, just like, I hate Heather. I can't tell you how many times I heard that. And I'm like, well, I would probably be Heather in that equation. I would be like trying to organize things. No, it's fine. I know where the car is.
Yeah, seize control wherever possible.
Yeah.
With Heather, I had no ill will toward her until my second viewing of it. I saw it in the theater, and I hadn't seen it until like 4 days ago. And so rewatching it from my perspective now, 25 years later, I was like, at the beginning in the interviews, she is asking nothing but leading questions of everybody she comes to. It's almost like she wants to get them on script. And so she's throwing out these things. And I'm like, okay, she's a student documentarian. We can't assume she's going to be the seasoned pro that doesn't ask leading questions.
Right.
But I'm more sensitive to that for some reason. But as the movie progressed, I thought Heather held her own with the other two in terms of the mental degradation that we get to witness. And she's kind of the spine of it all.
I feel like if it were me, I would just be like, guys, I have no clue where we are. We got to come together here. I don't think I would try to right the ship quite so hard. Be like, nope, it's gone. We're ruined. Let's get out of here somehow.
Yeah, if I act confident, it'll all work out okay. And that maybe has
Couldn't
worked
be
in
me.
the past, not this time.
Could not be me.
Yeah,
But we all know people like that who are just like, no. And that confidence is what helps keep the ship together. There are just wonderfully inexplicable events that occur in this film, like where you can't walk south the entire day and end up back where you started.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that's what happens. And I love that you have those moments where it's just like, like suddenly the laws of the universe are not in play anymore.
And that's one of my favorite things in like horror media across the board, are those like pseudo psychedelic, like you are doing one thing that is demonstrably gonna act normally, and then when it doesn't act normally and you lose time or like things loop back, like that always tickles a part of my brain, and I love to see it.
I think I could think I was traveling south all day long and still end up back where I came from. It felt it felt far too realistic for me anyway. Even nowadays, if I go somewhere where the phone signal cuts off, like, right, does anyone remember what a map is? Can we look at one? So there, without the tech on their side, yeah, I mean, it was really believable. The dynamic kept changing between them, and I think for as much as there was no clear sort of hero and villain, I think it's a shame that there was a reaction to Heather that certain people had, because she did have to carry a lot of it, because her character was leaning into the take charge mode. As Robin was saying, something's happening that should cause a certain outcome, and when that doesn't, if you've got no point of reference, you're just like, right, we have to keep trying things within our laws of reality that should take us out of this. And Heather is the person that will do that and pull everyone together and be saying, okay, we have to keep trying to go in this direction, and there has to be a way out of that. So it's in line with her character. She's great. They're all great at the improv, and I think we know this even more nowadays from years of bad found footage movies with bad improv in them. And it's a shame that reaction was, I think, mainly directed at Heather if people were having an adverse reaction to them, because it's absolutely in line with, as you say, how people would act in that scenario.
I think there's that aspect that we get a lot of times in reaction to media is she was the bossy woman. So no one likes the bossy woman.
Yeah.
So she takes the brunt of it when they were all idiots at different times in the movie. And jerks and all kinds of, all did stupid stuff that did not help any of them. And another thing I think about this movie, more so maybe than a lot of other horror movies, is like, if you can't give yourself over to the situation, it's not going to work for you. I've had this weirdly in the last week. I've had this conversation twice with two different people about, well, I want a movie that scares me. And I'm like, well, if that's your attitude going in, you're not going to be scared. I was like, if you are challenging the movie to scare you, it won't. If you give yourself over to the movie, it might not. But like this one, like I think so many people couldn't give themselves over to the idea of how terrifying it would be to be lost in the woods. Forget anything supernatural, but like to feel like I walked a day south and I got nowhere, like how they would, we don't know where to go now. We walked for a day and we should not be able to do that. Like if you can put yourself in the shoes of the characters, it's terrifying. And then you can add the actual scary stuff on top of it, but you have to be able to give yourself over. And I think a lot of people weren't ready to do it.
Well, and I think on this movie especially, expectations were so high for the mass audience that they were coming in hearing this was the scariest film, you'd ever seen. And so they were braced for it. And they're like, you scare me as opposed to me meeting you where you are.
Talking about Heather getting the brunt of the negative aspect of the film, she also got mocked the most in several different films, which she had no control over the replication of her image. And I mean, in this, I think when we think about the Blair Witch, it's always kind of this scene that gets mocked and stuff like that. And I mean, that is just pure, like the apologizing to the families like this, the crying, like actual tears, snot coming down your nose. And yet she got mocked regarding that in cartoons, in different horror films. And if you think about it, there's a lot of times where when you have any sort of horror film, it's usually the female character that's going to get the brunt. I've never seen anything regarding Josh and Mike in any other film. When it's talking about the Blair Witch, it's always Heather and the cap that I did, and then getting right up close in the nose. I can't cry for you guys, but you get
that's okay. We'll be all right without the snot.
He can do it in post. It'll be okay.
Can fix it in post. Yeah.
I was just say that moment is so iconic.
Yeah.
Like because it's so raw, because it's shot poorly, and I think that was a mistake on Heather Donahue's part. She was meaning to actually frame herself and just didn't have a good angle, but that's what made it feel off. That's what made it feel real. Yes, it's unfortunate that like the most iconic moment is going to be always the most parodied. And it's unfortunate that it ended up being Heather because I agree. I think she gives a terrific performance. she basically carries that movie. Unfortunately, she didn't get the compensation on many levels, artistically or financially.
I think it's like the emotional center of the film, that scene. Everything else you see is generally anger or fear from everyone. And understandably, you're frustrated and you're scared. But then you get so tired, eventually, you kind of break down. And that was that moment that, to me, if you're paying attention, like, it should make you feel for her the most.
Yeah.
That you're seeing, maybe the guys are feeling this, but they're not showing it. Like, she's thought enough to get up, get the camera out and be like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm lost completely, emotionally, physically, everything. So, and without that scene, I think it also is a lesser film.
Well, and without Heather, it would be a lesser film. Because, I mean, they always say, like, get that camera out of my face. It's like, this is a documentary. Right. I need to be recording everything. And if she hadn't done that, then we wouldn't have, as an audience, we never would have known what had happened.
Well, and also the fact that I love that they layer that in, because it answers the question of why do they keep filming, is that they layer that in, that it's safer if I feel like if I have purpose. The reason I'm shooting is because we're okay, because we're just making a documentary. We're not lost in the woods as long as I keep looking through this camera lens.
Yeah, when they press her on that and she's like, this is all I've got. Like, that's one of those things that hits my heart, like, every time I see that piece of the movie.
One other fun fact, well, not even a fun fact really, but one of the elements of this that I think makes it special, and I think somebody alluded to it earlier, they didn't have a budget to have a witch. So we get sticks and rocks and people being lost and falling apart. Those are the special effects, right?
Hey, I tattooed those sticks on my body.
Oh my gosh.
Kevin, I'm going to bounce back down to you. How do you think they made the banal, rocks and sticks and things like that? How do they make that as scary as they did?
They had great designs they were working with. They had great sound design that really helps. It's often overlooked. And I think they had this structure where you do have things that happen during the day that are odd or upsetting, but it's a very clear nighttime is a scary time. Here's the daylight. Nighttime is a scary time. Here's the daylight. So in the daylight, you get time to look at the stick figures, the rocks. You're feeling unnerved, but it's actually a little bit better than the scares that are coming. So you're taking it all in, and I just think they're great at constructing it in a way that allows you to process things while you're staying on board for the full ride. I think it works brilliantly.
And that sound design comment is so on it, because there's no score or music, but like the forest atmosphere sounds are so oppressive, and they have them like keyed in such a way that it just burrows into your ears. It always makes me stressed out. Like when they're rustling the tents and everything, like they really knew how to like amp that up just right.
Well, and listening to the commentary with Myrick and Sanchez, they talk about how they keep pulling the ambient sound down and down and down, so that by the end, it's almost like a vacuum, and all you hear are the diegetic sounds, but you don't hear the natural world. You just hear the unnatural world.
It's incredible. It's so cool.
Eric.
I was disappointed in never getting a glimpse of the witch, even like a vague shadow or something that I could pin what my idea of the witch is to. It actually is ingenious never showing it, because we have to supply that.
Yeah.
Even
Eric, the witch is the friends we made along the way.
Yes. The witch was in your heart the whole time.
Yeah.
It's all about the journey.
That scene where Heather runs out of the tent and like screams, what the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? Like she didn't swing her camera far enough to see, because there was a crew member actually there dressed in like a white, body stocking. That was going to be like the scary thing that she would see in the lens, but she didn't swing the camera far enough. And so, or whomever was, because I guess she's in the shot, but that they didn't get that on camera. So you only get her looking off lens and going, what the fuck is that? Which again, to your point, Eric, I think that's brilliant. I think it's so
thank
smart.
Goodness they didn't catch it.
Yeah.
But
it's the guy in the body stocking.
If they swing around and show Green Man from Sunny, no way. Like it's not scary.
Maybe if they had shown like white eyes or something, that would have been scary. But one of the things that I hated about Blair Witch was they actually had the witch. I'm like, no, we don't need that. No.
Well, I think Blair Witch 2016 was for people who were bitching and moaning that they didn't get to see a witch.
Yeah.
And they're like,
okay,
"All
you
right,
want to see it? I'll show you.
here's your witch."
I mean, I guarantee you that at least one person left each screening trying to convince their friends that they saw the witch. They'll be like, "Oh, at minute 79, did you not see that bit in the branches?" And she
It's
was
in the
there.
film
I
grain,
guarantee that
dude.
happened. Yeah.
They trucked all of those rocks. Ben Rock, our production designer, there are no rocks in the forest, and so he had to like strap on a backpack and like haul a bunch of rocks out into the middle of nowhere. And then they're like, we need more rocks. And so he
You're telling me the guy who dragged rocks into the forest was named Ben Rocks?
That's right.
Get out of town. No way. Did they have Johnny Reiterman on the script too?
He had one job.
I was born to do this. Yeah.
Well, and we're going to just throw a shout out because Ben Rock has an incredible series of articles on Dread Central that if you Google Ben Rock, Dread Central, Blair Witch, you will find his kind of like how he came into the story, because he was one of the first to hear Greg Hale, one of the producers, talk about this movie. And Greg Hale like pitched it to Ben Rock and said, there's these documentary filmmakers. They went into the woods. They got lost. Their footage was found later and blah, 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 blah. And Ben Rock was like, no way. And he's like, I just made all that up. That's not true. And he went, oh, we got to make that movie. And so Ben Rock was kind of like the first proof of concept that, yes, this would be interesting for people. But I do highly recommend people check out Ben Rock's story, because it's basically from the beginning all the way through the sequel, et cetera, because Ben Rock directed several of the mock documentaries that accompany the companion pieces. Like he's a key player in the Blair Witch universe that doesn't get talked about very much. Mark, before I so rudely interrupted you with my fun fact.
No, this is probably the only maybe negative thing I would say. Watching it this time again, I just watched it a few days ago, and it had been a long time since I watched it. I think the one thing we missed by a lot of the footage being shot by the actors is that we didn't have the stuff shot by a filmmaker. I just felt like while there was awesome stuff, there was a lot of missed opportunities that you didn't have to show the witch, you didn't have to do anything, but with sound design and scares, I feel like if you had someone who knew a little bit more what to do with a camera and how to do it, like that, it would even be more terrifying. Again, I still love it, but I feel like, I'm watching it like, oh man, here, we could have amped this up even more.
It's not a manicured found footage movie. And I mean, I always give a lot of credit to found footage because it supposedly looks easy. It's like somebody just picked up a camera. It's like, no. That's not how it works. You got to orchestrate these scares to happen in camera.
Yeah, without it feel like you orchestrated them. Yeah.
And
I watch my kids' movies that they made when they're kids, and you're like, that's what an actual found footage movie would look like. It's awful. No one would want to watch it.
I feel like that's a lot of the mistakes that people made after this film that wanted to do found footage. And it's like, no, there's a finesse that you have to do. And this ain't it. This ain't it at all. This is why your $50,000 budget is not going to make 160 million. It's like, no.
Well, and the ending, Eric, you talked about, like not getting it at first. I think a lot of people were kind of like, wait, what happened? And the executives at Artisan, who ended up distributing the film, were among them because they had to go back and shoot like 4 different alternate endings that involved, like Mike hanging on a giant stick man or Mike levitating in the air. None of those ended up working. And so they went back to the original concept, was just, her walking into the room and seeing Mike standing in the corner, which, I don't know who else said it, but like that was chilling to me. Like the way that movie ended just knocked me flat. And then it just goes to that kind of drone over the credits. Now, here's something that I wasn't thinking about until I was rereading the Blair Witch dossier. We all know whose house that is that they're in at the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't. Somebody elucidate.
Rustin Parr.
Yeah, that's the guy who killed the 7 kids.
Right. What happened to Rustin Parr's house?
Burned down.
So that house
Years ago.
doesn't exist.
Hmm.
Whoa! What? That's crazy. I had no idea. That's awesome. That's that thing I talk about where it's that missing time and like this should not be here, but it is. And that's
Because
so
if you
cool.
watch, I mean, Blair Witch 2, I mean, they show up and they've got they go to the ruins of Rustin Parr's house, and it's got the big tree growing up in the middle of it. But that's because Rustin Parr's house does not exist.
See, I didn't connect that. Like, I remember them checking that place out. For some reason, I was like, yeah, that house could have been demolished and a giant tree could have grown in the same span of time. Sure. Like, I did not put those pieces together. That's incredible. And I don't know how online any of you guys are, but there's this, like, huge like wave of like fan theorists and stuff out nowadays. And there's one about the Blair Witch Project that I think is really divisive, and I would love to hear everybody's thoughts on it. But there's a lot of people who say that they feel like the film points to there being no Blair Witch or supernatural presence, period. Like, there's a legend about the Blair Witch, sure, but she's not real, and nothing messed up and unnatural happens to them there. But the two dudes are plotting together to kill Heather and pass this off on the witch. I don't think it holds water. I don't think it's a very good theory. I don't have all the details for you, so, you know, whatever. But how do any of you guys feel about that?
Which two dudes, Josh and Mike, or the two dudes
those two dudes,
interview that are fishing?
Yeah, Josh and Mike. I couldn't remember their names, but yeah, those two.
I love the fact that it might be the Coffin Rock guys.
I mean, they're out there fishing in woods they know are haunted, so it's like something's up with
What's
them.
up with those? Yeah.
Yeah. I got no feeling that they were going to kill Heather, especially since Josh had never met Mike before. So I don't know how that would be. It's like
Josh and Mike knew each other. Josh and Mike knew each other.
Oh,
Heather and Mike didn't know each other.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's whichever. Yeah, Josh and Heather have some kind of a bad
they went
blood
to,
situation.
they were in class together.
Yeah, and the idea is he's mad at her over something, and he links up with this guy, and he's like, we should totally kill her. And then they frame it all around this witch thing. I think it's not a very good theory because I think everything in the movie points to it being bizarre.
Yeah.
And I think it's a larger thing I've noticed with a lot of like younger internet like fan theorists, I guess, for lack of a better word, is they like to like rationalize and make stuff real when it doesn't need to be.
As opposed to being supernatural?
Yeah. And be like, well, what is actually going on is la 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 la.
Or just to create an alternative history.
Yeah. I think it's I think they look at it as like a sort of thought or writing exercise to just be like, what if, and then make it all fit from there.
Well, I think like a lot of conspiracy theories, if you ask a few questions, you generally can't answer them. My question is like, okay, so they plotted to do this, but they disappeared. What happened to them then? They're both gone. Did they like go into hiding?
What was their end game?
I think they ran off to Vermont and got married, but that's just me.
What?
My first question would be, how much Lego did they take to rebuild Rustin Parr's house just to set him up from here?
No, that's Mega Blocks, dude. There's no way to do that with Legos.
There's a great book called 8 Days in the Woods by Matt Blasey, and that kind of talks about the whole origin, the filmmaking, and the behind the scenes, and what came of it. It's a triumph at Sundance, and then later that summer in the multiplexes. Well worth checking out. But then, as with any good success story, we're going to have a sequel. And so we had the year later, we had Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2, which was directed by Joe Berlinger, famed documentarian of the Paradise Lost movies. I can see where that could have been fun because he was making his narrative feature debut. You got a documentarian who's making a narrative feature for the first time as a sequel to two regular filmmakers making a fake documentary for the first time. I revisited Blair Witch 2 for this as well. Any people's thoughts on Book of Shadows?
I
got
love
one.
that movie.
Yeah, I'm on the
Okay,
same
good.
team.
Good.
I love
This
it.
is good. All right.
It's been way too long since I've seen it. I didn't get to rewatch it. I remember in the theaters being disturbed by some of it, but it didn't have the impact at all that the first one had. But I haven't seen it since to say if I would think differently now.
Kevin, kick us off.
Well, I picked it up on VHS. I didn't see it in the theaters, but VHS was sold with the tantalizing promise of, trying to figure out the secret of S. Revere. And I never did figure out the secret of S. Revere, apart from seeing the extra features. But I loved it. I thought it was clever. I thought it was a great comment on the first movie and a great exploration of perception and realities and how they can be warped. From the very start, when you get disposable teens playing over the opening credits, it's setting out a really great tidy stall that nobody really wanted, because people seem to think that he just wanted another group of teens lost in the woods, which is what you got when Blair Witch came out. And I don't like that one. But I really like Book of Shadows, and I think it was... I can understand people who wouldn't like it. I think it was a big swing. And for me, it's a swing and a hit. It doesn't all work, but I think the cast are really good. And as I say, I would watch that 5 times over compared to something that was rushed out that just tried to put teens in the woods again and do that. I think it's really good, and more people should come around to the secret of S. Revere one day.
I skipped it for years and years and years because everybody always told me, like, it sucks, don't even bother. Like, it's not even good. What are you talking about? And I woke up one morning in the past handful of years, I'm just like, you know what? It's on streaming. I got nothing else to do. I'm going to watch it. And it like sucked me all the way in. Thought it was so much fun. It's again that pseudo psychedelic time travel, like we're in this reality and this other reality at the same time, and they're bumping against each other and making things happen. It feels like really dark Doctor Who plot. And that like just got the hooks all the way in. I was like, this is so cool. It's corny, and it's definitely like what was 2000 that one came out, right? So it definitely feels like Y2K horror film, Y2K horror sequel for sure. But that's a charm to me, and it's just so much fun. It was cool. By the end, when they're like unraveling the whole story and like showing you this was this and that was that, I bet you didn't think of that. It totally worked on me, and I was super thrilled. And I was like, why did I wait 25 years to watch this movie? This rules.
Katie?
I recall Jeffrey Donovan, so that was my introduction to him, and it's
Pretty hot in that one.
Yeah, and that's still I think he's done of all the actors in that film, I think he's done the most from that. I have to give it a credit that it's like, Blair Witch came out in 99, this came out in 2000. For that amount of time to do the script, the production, get everybody together and get it out in, I think, less than a year. I mean, I have to give it credit for that. I did not like it when I recall watching it, just because Blair Witch was so unique with the whole, at least to me, with the whole found footage. And then to see this one being polar opposite, I was like, oh, okay, so this is a different kind of horror movie. But then they got into the time, it's like everything about the cameras listing everywhere and, everywhere, and how you can't believe what you see. And I don't know, I haven't seen it. I think I've seen it maybe twice since it came out, which in 20 years, my memory's not that great. But yeah, it wasn't one of my faves.
I watched it 2 days ago and found it to be just like when I first saw it years ago. It is not the sequel to Blair Witch that I wanted.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many people really wanted this, but in its defense, it's at least doing something different.
Yeah.
It's not just a carbon copy of what was successful before. And so I have to give it respect for that. One question occurred to me by the end of it, though, was, what is the Book of Shadows? There are no books featured in this film. So what exactly is the Book of Shadows, and how is it a factor in the story at all?
Well, and also, why does it have to be called Book of Shadows Blair Witch 2? Because now I have to file it over here in the BO instead of BL. So rude. So I watched it recently with the commentary by Joe Berlinger. And one of the things I found interesting, I can't say I love the film itself, but I liked what he was doing because he kind of, being a documentarian, he was a little kind of put off by the idea of artisans selling Blair Witch as a real thing. Like, this really happened. Like, that was the whole marketing pull, and all the mock documentaries that were created around it, the website, etc., was meant to extend the idea that this really happened. And he's kind of like, how interesting as a documentarian that this story can be told, a false story can be put forth as true, and people actually believe it. And so that was what he wanted to address with his story, was what you see, what you don't see. You know, what the story I tell you is only the story I'm telling you. It's not necessarily the whole story.
I bet that guy goes up to kids and tells them wrestling's fake.
Wait, what?
Oh, sorry. I mean,
This is how you tell me?
He's obviously wrong, but he does that. Yeah.
yeah. The Undertaker is a zombie cowboy.
One of the issues I had with Book of Shadows was I don't think the dialogue is as strong, which is interesting considering how it was improvised for the first one. You know, but I feel like the dialogue feels a little too on the nose, and maybe, and again, I know it was rushed because they had an October release date in place before they even started filming. To your point, Mark, like the original cut of Blair Witch Project was 2.5 hours long, and they kept cutting and got it down to the essence of it that played, because, you know, Ben Rock talks about how he watched that 2-hour version and he's like, oh, we've completely wasted our time. That experiment did not work at all. And it was all about cutting. And I feel like maybe if there had been more time to refine the script, and if there'd been more time to, you know, work on the editing in that regard, maybe there could have been a good sequel to be found in Blair Witch 2, or at least one that would have resonated with more people.
Eric had said, you know, that at least they tried something different, which is true, but is that what anyone wants in a sequel?
Right.
You know,
right.
I love the Blair Witch. I want that feeling again, and you did not give it to me. So, you know, I think people can go back to it, like, kind of in hindsight later and say, all right, maybe I can assess it differently.
Yeah.
But, like, what we all want is a carbon copy of how it made us feel, whatever movie it was. Even though we know that in reality, if they gave us that, it would not be good and it would be terrible, and we would be upset with it as well.
Here's a ham.
I do remember.
I want a ham sandwich. Well, here's the best peanut butter and jelly sandwich I know how to make. There you go.
Right.
Yeah.
But I agree that, I think even though they probably had more seasoned actors in the sequel, it felt a lot more like acting.
I agree.
You know, that idea of that, real acting, the best acting is when you can't tell someone's acting. It should not feel like acting, and it felt like acting. Yeah. Again, which when you rush something, and I've had talking about the MCU with some people recently, is like they killed it because of the timelines. Just because so same with Blair Witch 2, who cares if you want to maximize the Halloween after Blair Witch as like your date? You should have taken time.
Yeah.
The script is the key, other than, the Blair Witch is the exception where they like did this experiment and it worked. If you take the time to develop a really good script, you're going to have a better movie, but you rushed it and you got what you got.
Yeah, but who wants a better movie when you've got brand recognition?
We want the money. It's who's making the decisions.
Yeah.
We flip ahead to Blair Witch from 2016, directed by Adam Wingard and written by Simon Barrett. We got to see a witch, for all of those who were complaining they didn't get to see a witch in Blair Witch Project. People's thoughts on Blair Witch. I think I've gotten Katie's sentiments. Anybody else?
Also loved this one.
I'm with Katie on this one. Thumbs down.
I heard so many thumbs down. I said no. I haven't watched it, so maybe I will someday.
One of the reasons why I didn't like it per se is that all the things that people complained about with Blair Witch, with the shaky cam and all that stuff, it's been 16 years. You don't have to have, like, I can run with my phone and be less shaky than these guys were. So I thought they were just trying to go back. Let's give it that feel that really annoyed people in the original. That'll really get their juices flowing. No, it didn't need to do that.
Eric, did you see this one? I forget.
I did. I rewatched it again yesterday, and it does a lot right. A lot more right than wrong to me. It is not as good as the first one, but it's basically a remake of Blair Witch Project with a bigger budget, and some, more advanced tech, and a whole lot more jump scares.
Yeah.
It's like they quadrupled down on the jump scares. I'm not sure there was even a jump scare in Blair Witch, the first one, but the just unnecessary jump scares in this. For its faults, it did disturb me and scare me more than Book of Shadows, which I found nothing disturbing or scary about. And they added body horror into this, so they're, I guess, a little bit with the teeth in the first Blair Witch. It's like they were putting a bunch of stuff in the blender beyond what we've been given before.
Well, and I got to see this in the theater, and it was loud. And I was like, this may be the loudest movie I've ever heard. And what I compared it to at the time was kind of it's a roller coaster. It's a haunted house ride where around every corner there's going to be a jump scare. And it's delivering the Blair Witch for everybody who had issues with the Blair Witch Project. And I don't have a problem with that. If you want this Blair Witch or if you want this Blair Witch, here, they're both there for you now, and you can stop bitching and moaning about the Blair Witch Project. Like, oh, good. Well, go right down the aisle, and you'll find Blair Witch. There it is for you.
Yeah, we've got Blair Witch Original, new Blair Witch. They've got Orange Blair Witch now. You just got to go to a freestyle fountain for it.
They even have Spicy Blair Witch, the erotic witch
I'm
project or whatever.
The Bear Wench Project.
The Bear Wench, yeah.
That's called. Yeah.
I didn't love this version, Blair Witch from 2016, but I also didn't dislike it. I think what it suffers from is a genuine reason to be in the woods. I didn't necessarily buy into it felt a little hackneyed, the idea of I'm going to be searching for my sister, especially with the lore having been as thoroughly explored as it had been. I think, it's a little late in the game for that to be like, this sister of mine from, who's 15 years older than me. So that was one of the things that I was wanting, I wanted just a little stronger reason. Also, I don't think the acting I don't know if it's the acting or the script or what, but the things that the actors have to say in Blair Witch, I find a little, I don't know, it doesn't resonate with me. It feels like it's there to be a traditional horror film.
There was also the, time travel aspect or time skipping aspect in it with people that were in the group that then left a certain place and then came back, and it had been 7 or 10 days later. They're like, oh, what's happening? And it's like, okay, can we just get this all in the group and just keep it that way so that we all have that same crazy mentality? And now I'm trying to figure out.
So we're all experiencing it together, right? Yeah.
And it's like, here's some drones, and then they crash. I'm like, well, that seemed like a waste of time. It's like the drone goes up in the air and then it crashes down. So yay, we got
think the drone stuff was very funny.
Yeah,
I got a kick
we
out of
got a drone. Yay.
Well, and I think that was another reason for this movie was tech had advanced. So they're like, well, what would it be like to do Blair Witch now? I think it's absolutely right that it is a remake of Blair Witch Project. It's just we've got better tech now.
And I think that's because that's the thing, when I show friends who are either just getting into horror or haven't seen Blair Witch for whatever reason, when I show it to them, they always write off as soon as people get lost. They're like, well, you couldn't do this anymore. You got, maps and everything on your phone. There's no way you get lost. And it felt like in Blair Witch 2016, they're like, you can't do that. There's a goddamn witch.
Right?
Your technology is not going to work against an ancient evil
witch says
woman.
no.
I'm sorry. Exactly. Yeah. That holds priority over Wi-Fi.
I live in Central Virginia. I drive, and there are places where my phone doesn't work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be fine if you're out in the woods. It's most likely your phone is not working.
Well, and I think these folks would, in this day and age where we're so reliant on GPS, I think, all you got to do is lose signal and you're doomed. Like, at least I bought Heather and Josh and Mike that they were working with their compass. Like there was a fear factor involved there because they actually had the tools to get themselves out of the woods and it didn't work. I do want to circle back around to the map thing in just a second with Mike, but Kevin, I wanted to see what were some issues you took with the 2016 Blair Witch.
Just so many issues. Did it come out to? It came out to some sort of rave secret preview, didn't it? Was it?
Yeah, it was called The Woods. Yeah.
So I was excited when I heard that. I was like, oh, that's come out to a secret preview screening. Fans have really enjoyed it. And then when it started to get the wider release opinion on it seemed to cool slightly, and I thought, well, I'm not going to rush to it, but I will watch it. I quite like the work of Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett, usually. And I was looking forward to it. But yeah, it is, as Mark said, people wanting the feeling they got from the Blair Witch Project, but, you kind of want the same but different. The drones, I hated the drones. I hated the fact that the finale, it had an Exorcist 3 problem in which that film got there and then producers were like, you need an exorcism. That's what it is. You get to the end of Blair Witch and folk must have been saying, well, you need the witch. Right. It wasn't there for any of the other really effective stuff that we've done over the years. Yeah, but it's called Blair Witch, so you need a witch, and maybe do it in this TARDIS house that keeps popping up. So that's all they go with. And I got to the end, I was just like, this. I've not only disliked the film, but I've disliked the fact that it's tried to retrofit a couple of elements, it felt to me, and that made me resent it a bit more.
Yeah, and I think, Aaron, you're thinking like it's a roller coaster haunted house. I think I went in with that expectation to begin with. It's like, okay, I might as well be going through a Blair Witch haunted house at Halloween Horror Nights or something. And going in with that expectation set, I loved it, and I had a whole lot of fun because I didn't think there was any way they were going to pin down the Blair Witch Project again. It was like, you know what? They're going to make me like throw popcorn across the theater, and it's going to be a bunch of city slickers stuck in the woods, and I'm going to have a really good time watching it.
The scariest part to me was when, I think it's Callie Henderson is going through the tunnel and gave me that, claustrophobic feel. But then it reminded me of the film where the women go spelunking and
Descent.
Great movie.
So that's the thing. It's like when I saw that, I was like, okay, I'm scared of this, but I'm also reminded of The Descent. So it's like, so it's not really an original scare, but I'm still scared. I'm kind of looking forward to the new one they're making.
Oh, hold the phone.
Oh, you didn't know this?
Run that back, yeah.
Am I going to blow your mind twice today,
I think
Robin?
so. I think so.
Yes, they are in production making a new one. And in fact, I know the director that's doing it. He had a movie that played at Telluride Horror Show, and I liked that one.
Talking about the found footage aspect of it, because Adam Wingard had done segment for the VHS franchise. So he seemed like the right guy for the job. And it's interesting that now he's directing like giant, Godzilla movies with no found footage. I like you, Kevin, I had followed his career and I was kind of like, well, this is an interesting step up for you. Like you actually have a budget here to play with. And I felt like they made the most of that budget in terms of making a big haunted house type movie. Circling back to the idea of the found footage, though, the idea of making a quality found footage movie, Blair Witch didn't really kick off a whole lot of imitators. It really did feel like a phenomenon. And actually, Blair Witch got a lot of backlash by the time the sequel came out. Like people were like, I don't want a Blair Witch Project sequel. I don't want Blair Witch Project anymore. You fooled me already. And it wasn't until we got to Paranormal Activity that we started seeing just the flood of found footage movies. But there's a really great documentary on Shudder called The Found Footage Phenomenon that kind of tracks the history of found footage and the various touchstones along the way.
Yeah, I think that documentary is how I found out about the last broadcast.
Oh, you want to talk about the last broadcast, do you?
Well, and before that one, I also want to give, I don't know if I can call it a shout out because I didn't enjoy it, but the McPherson tape, have you seen that?
Oh, man.
Sounds familiar.
Is that like the UFO incident?
Yeah. Yeah, that one I was so excited for, and that was probably my bad, but I was so excited for it. And then when I watched it, I was like, it's a family. I did the same thing everybody did about Blair Witch Project, where it's like, it's a family arguing. The few like UFO-y alien pieces in it I thought were really cool, but yeah, I was like, man, they really did figure out how to like create a narrative in found footage better as the years went on.
A friend of mine slipped me a bootleg of that one. I think they say "holy shit" in it about like 8,000 times. That's what I wrote on the disc was "holy shit."
Holy shit.
But last broadcast, I'm glad you mentioned that, Robin, because 1998 is when last broadcast came out. It came out a full year before Blair Witch Project, and a lot of people were talking about, well, maybe Blair Witch Project was inspired by it, because the filmmakers were aware of that film. And while I was pretty underwhelmed by it the first time around, I actually appreciated it a lot more this time. So I'm curious to hear other people's thoughts.
I've only seen it once, and I was also severely underwhelmed. I thought, without saying too much for anyone who is going to see this and then be like, well, I guess I got to find that movie, the tonal shift at the end, like threw me for a loop, and not in like an interesting, mind-blowing way, in a more like a, wait, is this the same movie I started? Because
no, it's not.
I feel like it.
Yeah, I'm with Robin on that. I was on board with most of it and found it effective, but without spoiling anything, the ending did not stick the landing.
Pretty much in agreement, yeah. And I do remember, I think it was on Channel 4 or Film 4 here in the UK, and I'd already been talked about as this film that was overshadowed by the Blair Witch Project. So see the comparisons and see what you think. And my first viewing of it, I had a real growing feeling of dread as it was playing out for, say, the first 70, 80 minutes. Really well done in that way it recreated the full documentary. In fact, the dry delivery, the exploration of the footage was absolutely brilliant. And then that ending comes along, and again, as I said about a film earlier, it's a big swing, but I don't think that one is a hit, but it's an interesting move.
So I had seen, I kind of came to it as that it was this other film that preceded Blair Witch Project. The films are so different. Like, yes, there are filmmakers who go missing, but that's kind of where the similarities end. And I like the kind of polished quality of it, that it's an actual documentary. Like, we've got, we're talking to various people. Here's some reenactments. Here's some footage. And with regard to the end, and I will not spoil it because I think it's worth experiencing, what I like about the ending is that it's reinforcing the point that the filmmakers were going for, which is, in any documentary, you're only going to see what I present to you. I'm going to tell you this story, but that's not the whole truth. It's similar to what Berlinger was trying, for us to kind of leave the established setup that we've been going with for the most of the movie and to go from a different viewpoint. I think that was kind of the point, was to be like, oh, all along I've been following this story, but that's not the whole story. It's just the story that I was being told. And so I came to appreciate it more. And I think it's one of those, and this is certainly true of Blair Witch and a lot of the other films we've talked about, is that I think it isn't necessarily the film you wanted. And if you go in with the expectations of being disappointed with the film that you wanted, as opposed to the film that you got, like, I think Last Broadcast has some things to recommend it, as long as you don't think it is going to be Blair Witch, or that's going to play by the same rules as Blair Witch.
Yeah, I think that's because
follow the preschool advice of you get what you get and you don't get upset.
Yeah,
it's hard to do, but it can be helpful going into movies with that attitude.
Yeah, because hearing you say that was, I'm with Kevin on, I remember when I started it, I was like latched in, and because I love when things commit to trying to be a documentary and like not winking at the camera about it or whatever. And I had this same problem with Horror in the High Desert a little bit, where I'm like latched into the documentary. I've bought into the reality, but I feel like it's too legit of a documentary. So I'm like, okay, like it might be my like poor attention span, but I'm like, give me something, give me anything, please. So I'll probably go back to Last Broadcast and give it a good second college try, but yeah, it left me like wanting so much.
I think that's fair because, again, I don't think it's as effective a film by any stretch as Blair Witch is. I think it's more interesting that people give it credit for, and a lot of times it is because of the shift at the end, where you're like, well, you can't do that. It's like, exactly, that's the point. You're playing by a different rule book now.
So I can confirm the Blair Witch Project reimagining coming from Blumhouse. This is an article by joblo.com, and the director is Oliver Park, who directed 2022's The Offering.
Oh, The Offering was cool. I liked that movie.
Yeah, that's why when I found out, it's like, knowing he's in charge of it, I have high hopes.
All right, well, fingers crossed.
Yes.
Sure. Final thoughts on the Blair Witch phenomenon, Mark?
I can say that those final few minutes were almost as effective as the first time I saw him in the theater. Her screams, the running around, the children's handprints, you're like, what the hell is going on? And then you see him in the corner and it ends. It's an iconic horror scene to me, like a moment. And since we didn't get to talk about it, I do have to say one of the weakest parts is I kicked the map in the creek.
True.
What? You did? Hey, how do you even kick a map? It's like it's a piece of paper.
Oh, I'll show you.
Kind of looking back, one of the funniest parts.
Robin?
You know, I really think that the original Blair Witch Project will go down as one of the greatest modern horror movies ever made, because it does what anything that changes the game does, where it flips the whole script and does things people had not really considered, especially not in the mainstream, to do. And so I think it's a deeply important movie. I think it's one of the most effective horror movies I've ever seen. I always get a little every time I see it, because if you've never been lost in the woods, it's the worst fucking thing on earth, and I would not recommend it to anybody. And yeah, they're awesome. It's it's a whole cultural thing. It's like you said, it's been parodied everywhere, it's been praised everywhere, it's been hated on everywhere, and it's just super cool. And yeah, if you haven't seen it, what are you doing here? Go watch it.
Kevin?
It's a modern classic, and we've generally been in quite like-minded conversation here today, but I think it's also a reminder of the importance of nuance and conversation and dialogue about horror movies, because if you look at Blair Witch Project on the likes of IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes, it's just weighted at either end. I can understand people who watch it and think nothing happened, or that didn't scare me, or just don't like it. I'll disagree with them, but I can understand it. But that polarization doesn't mean it's a bad movie. But when you look at an average, it'll probably end up somewhere in the middle. Whereas the people who love it will believe that it should always be staying right near the top.
Yeah, it is interesting how divisive it still remains. And I think that's I think great art does that. It is divisive. It is inherently pushing buttons that are uncomfortable. And I think that's one of the things it does great. Eric?
I was prepared on rewatching this for the first time in 25 years to be underwhelmed. And I started out super critical of it, but then it's like y'all said, throwing yourself into it. You just go with the narrative they're telling. Also, I had intended to reread the Blair Witch Dossier, one of my beloved tomes, and haven't been able to locate it, which leads me to believe the Blair Witch must have stolen it.
Yep.
You're not supposed to know.
Katie?
Rewatching this and knowing the budget and working in film and knowing what goes on behind the scenes, this I just think is a masterclass that people should emulate and show. You don't need to have all the blood, all the boobs, all the fancy stuff to make a film that will honestly stand the test of time. I mean, from the beginning to end, it just looks like people are just talking and reacting. And that's what horror really needs to be, is just looking at the finesse of how this was done. You really have to give it to the editor too. One of the things about horror is honestly show the monster at the end, or don't show them at all and let your imagination try and figure out what's going on, because people's brains are way more fucked up than you're mostly probably going to see on screen. I will always love the ending Mike in the corner and Heather with the tears and the snot. I will always recommend this. Yes, I was pissed when I watched it in the theater and felt like I was getting dizzy, but I'm also looking back now. I love the fact that I was in the theater opening weekend for this film.
You talked about it being a masterclass. I also think it's a miracle. I think it's one of these movies that should never have happened. It should never have worked. It shouldn't have been a success on any level, much less the level that it ended up reaching. And that's why I enjoy reading about it and hearing about how it came to be, because it just doesn't seem like it could be possible that this movie, you know, born of the idea of we're going to improvise a bunch of stuff and we're going to hide things for our actors and they're going to shoot everything. There's no way this should have worked as well as it does, much less reach the mass audience that it did. And the fact that we had a website and books and comic books and things that just continue to expand the lore. And I don't feel like those are sequels so much as just another platform for telling a story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I love. That it was really exploring all those different media that it could. And at a time when that was not something that was being done, I think it was groundbreaking on many, many levels. And so the folks who didn't like Blair Witch Project, the experience, I think just kind of appreciating its moment in history, there's stuff to be found there as well. Thanks to everybody for coming on and talking about this. I was really looking forward to this as I was digging into all the nuts and bolts. And I'm really excited to chat about this one. And so thanks for sharing that with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I loved it.
Yeah.
I'm glad we got to
Yeah, this was a hoot.
Right before the actual 25th anniversary date too on July 3rd.
I know. It's almost like I planned it that way.
I know. Look at you. It's
Dude's
like-
got a brain the size of a planet.
Seriously. What a pro.
Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.